Thank you, Leon, and welcome to this series of um, videos to really understand more about your work that I've been really fascinated about. And I'd say that when I first met you at the APAC conference earlier this year, what struck me especially um, was just the ease in which you shared of yourself and all of your work and the whole sense that I received from it that it had a greatly strong spiritual grounding.
Hmm.
So can you share a little bit more about that? And let me ask you in the form of a question. And that would be is that how do you hold spirituality and coaching together uh, with special reference to the work that you do and offer the world?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question because for the most part, my experience has been that in coaching, spirituality doesn't come up very often. There are spiritual coach training programs, but for the most part, when people learn to coach other human beings, that dimension of our existence, we'll call the spiritual dimension, isn't really brought into the equation. And so the vast majority of coaching doesn't really go there, so to speak. But I've always had a personal interest in it because when I look at a human being or coaching a human being, I'm very interested in coaching the totality of that human being, not just a part of that human being, and speaking to the totality of that human being, which includes spirit and soul. So that doesn't mean that in every conversation or with every client that we're talking about those elements of their lives. It doesn't mean that at all. But it means that coaching makes room for that it recognizes that dimension of reality in the other person. And I think there's something powerful in like when a coach is creating a space that let's say invites in the consideration of those spiritual dimensions, then a lot more can be revealed about that person. A lot more of their self-awareness can be revealed in their own mind. So I like to say that like the role of a coach is to help a person, how do I say, perceive a higher truth than the one that they currently perceive a higher truth. So the higher truths are, let's say, the higher the perspective we have, the greater it reveals the truth of our being. So spirituality is about revealing our perceptual awareness and the existence of these dimensions of reality that can seem sometimes to people quite, I say, unearthly. So spirituality really is this quest to understand the truth of our being and the relationship that we have with each other and all that is. I mean, that's what spirituality is to me. So that when we're working on spiritual growth, people are actually able to see into that holistic nature of their being. They're able to see the workings of their ego, which is really important because it's the ego is that aspect of ourself which is distinctly not spiritual. It's distinctly fear-based. It's distinctly that part of us that sees everything as separate, that attaches to form, it makes our identity based on what we look like or what we have. And so if we pursue the spiritual dimension of our experience, then we're becoming aware of how this egoic self operates. And that, to me, that's like where the great change can begin to happen with another person, is not just that they're recognizing their spiritual dimension, but they're recognizing the gifts of their spiritual dimension, which is to begin to see themselves differently, to begin to listen within differently, and to begin to perceive the world around them very differently, so that these higher perceptual awarenesses, which really reflect a greater truth of our existence, can begin to kind of feed into their minds. And then they become more vibrant, more aware, more connected. Their relationships tend to bloom. Like all kinds of things happen because of this greater awareness of the spiritual dimension.
Fantastic. Thank you. You know the way that I hold what you spoke of ego, that ego and the soul as just two sides of the same coin. It just depends which side you're looking at it from. And what I'm sensing from what you're saying is that you're bringing that spiritual dimension. You're offering a client a new perception to what already exists.
Yes,
Right?
that's exactly it.
Can you share and share maybe a very quick example for all the people who are listening in, as to, in your own coaching practice, or with the people who you've trained in your deep coaching intensive program, where
Mm,
the spiritual dimension has actually um, been harnessed, so to speak.
yes. Yeah, for both the coach and the client, it really comes into it. Now, the one thing I should mention is that from a coaching perspective, like, we're not here to force spiritual awareness upon people.
Got it.
Because that's just not the way of coaching. And it doesn't matter what kind of coaching it is. This is not about saying, I have these certain spiritual beliefs or understandings and they've served me well. So let me impart them to you, dear client, because they've worked for me and therefore they'll work for you, kind of thinking. This is not the place that I'm going with. But what often happens when we do this deeper transformative work that the deep coaching is pointing to is that naturally arising within that human being is a desire to know themselves, like to really know themselves. And what happens then is that they quite naturally begin to speak about their own spiritual path or what their heart is calling them to do or what their soul longs for. Like, they begin to give voice to this in different ways. And that's then the opportunity where the coach can really meet them in that space, because the coach themselves is comfortable there. And that's what makes this work so important, is that in basic coach training, we're not necessarily taught how to meet people in these dimensions of spirit and of soul, because it's not meeting them the same way that we meet them in very transactional conversations. We're trying to nurture the flourishing of something within that person without imparting on that person certain ways to think or act or believe, because that goes counter to the whole coaching process. So we're starting to learn how to create these spaces in which people feel safe enough with us as coaches, because they see in us that there is a kind of a permission to go deep within themselves and begin to attend to these dimensions of their being that they may otherwise not, in just the daily busyness and doing that we all go through. And then amazing things happen.
Thank you. So I'm now, after this conversation, even more convinced that our meeting was a divinely orchestrated meeting. And I look forward to chatting with you and sharing with everyone who's listening and more. And we'll be back soon with some more stuff from beyond. So thank you so much.
Fantastic.